The first sign that Lady Verity Harcourt's marriage had a locked room inside it was not another woman's name on her husband's lips, but a small brass key glinting against his waistcoat where his wedding ring should have drawn his hand. England, 1863, lay beneath a wet Mayfair evening when the Duke of Norleigh returned to the house his wife had kept alive without him. Norleigh House shone as if polish, candlelight and discipline could make absence respectable. Every banister had been rubbed to a dark gleam, every lamp had been trimmed. White roses stood in silver bowls along the entrance hall, and the dining room waited with warmed plates, folded linen, and a table arranged for a husband who had spent 8 months away on estate business that had not required. 8 months. Verity stood at the foot of the staircase in a gown of deep blue silk, her gloved hands folded, her face composed with the kind of calm society mistook for contentment, because it was convenient to do so. She had learned that a duchess could be praised for dignity, while dying of loneliness in rooms no one thought to enter. Mr. Vale, the butler, appeared near the door with the careful stillness of a man who had witnessed too much and betrayed nothing. His Grace has reached the square, Your Grace. Thank you, Mr. Vale. Please see that the fires remain high in the dining room. His Grace dislikes a chill after travel. The butler bowed. Yes, Your Grace. His pause was small, but Verity knew it. The servants had watched her dine alone. They had watched her answer tenant letters, supervise repairs, calm offended relatives, receive callers, and preserve the dignity of House Ireton, while Duke treated home as a place to which one sent instructions. They never pitied her aloud. That was their kindness. The front door opened. Cold air swept in, carrying the scent of rain, wet wool, and London stone. Damien Ireton, Duke of Norleigh, entered in a dark travelling coat, tall and controlled, his face as severe as a portrait painted to remind descendants that tenderness was not a family requirement. He was handsome in the manner powerful men often were, because no one had ever dared tell him that beauty without warmth could feel like marble. Your Grace, Verity said. He removed his gloves. Duchess, not Verity, not wife, Duchess, a title laid down between them like a polished object. Mr. Vale stepped forward to take his coat. Damien gave it over and glanced around the entrance hall. You have opened the house. You wrote that you wished to receive callers this week. Did I? His surprise was mild, almost careless. Then you have done well. Once, in the first year of marriage, Verity might have lived 3 days on those words. Now they struck her as one more household approval, no warmer than praise for a well-set table. Dinner will be served at 8. I shall change. He moved toward the staircase. That was when the key caught the light. It hung from his watch chain, old brass against black waistcoat, small and worn smooth at the bow by use. Verity knew the keys of Norleigh House. The silver key to the plate room, the iron key to the wine cellar, the long black key to the family archive, the gilt key to her own escritoire, whose contents Damien had never cared enough to ask about. This key belonged to none of them. Her gaze held there for one breath too long. Damien's hand closed over it. Something wrong? No, she said, and felt how easily the lie came. Only that I had not seen that key before. His face changed almost imperceptibly. A shutter behind the eyes. It belongs to an old room. In this house? In the West Wing. The West Wing had been closed since before she came as a bride. Preserved, not neglected. Once, she had asked whether it should be aired, and Damien had replied that some rooms were best left undisturbed. At the time she had thought he meant grief. Now she wondered whether he had meant loyalty. I was not aware the West Wing required a private key, she said. It does not require your concern. The words were quiet. That made them worse. Verity inclined her head, because pride sometimes survived only by refusing to show where it had been struck. As you wish. Damien looked at her then, as if her obedience had become less convenient because it had acquired an edge. There is another matter. She waited. A wife in her position learned that questions often allowed a man to retreat before he had revealed enough. Lady Octavia Fenwick has returned to London. The name moved through the hall like the first draft beneath a locked door. Verity had heard it before, in fragments that society pretended were old history. Lady Octavia Fenwick, daughter of the Earl of Fenwick, once the most admired young woman of her season, once expected to marry Damien before she chose Sir Alistair Fenwick and his fortune instead. Now Sir Alistair was dead. Now she was a widow. Now Damien was speaking her name with more life in his voice than he had given his wife in months. "I see," Verity said. "Her circumstances are reduced." His tone sharpened faintly, as though he had already imagined her unkindness and prepared himself to resent it. Sir Alistair's settlement was not what she had been led to expect. She has few close protectors in London. That is unfortunate. She may require assistance. From you? Damien's jaw tightened. From this household, should it become necessary. She was once connected to my family. Once connected. How delicate men could be when naming the woman they had never stopped remembering. Behind them, one footman looked down at the floor. Mr. Vale became as still as the marble bust beside the door. Verity understood her role. She was to be gracious enough to shelter the woman who had owned the tenderness denied to her. "If Lady Octavia calls," she said, "she will be received according to her station." Damien's expression eased with relief so visible that it nearly humiliated them both. "I knew you would be reasonable." Reasonable. The word entered her like cold water. Not generous, not hurt, not worthy of being asked rather than informed. Reasonable. "I shall inform Mrs. Ansell," Verity said. "Will there be anything else before dinner?" For the first time, he seemed to notice her face. Not the person beneath it, only the signs of strain that might inconvenience the evening. "You are pale. It is the light. You should rest." "I have rested for 8 months." The words were soft, but they did not disappear. Damien went still. Before he could answer, the door knocker sounded. 3 clean strikes. Mr. Vale looked to Damien, then to Verity. Damien did not appear surprised. Verity did. "Are you expecting another guest?" she asked. Not precisely. Strange replies had formed much of her marriage. Mr. Vale opened the door. A lady stood beneath the portico, framed by rain and carriage lamps. She wore mourning black, softened with grey silk at the throat, and a lifted veil revealed a face arranged into fragile sorrow with astonishing care. Dark lashes, pale cheeks. A mouth made for trembling. In one gloved hand she held a calling card. At her throat, tied upon a narrow black ribbon, rested a small brass key, the same dull gleam, the same worn shape. Verity felt the house alter without a single object moving. Damien took 1 step forward. It was only 1 step. It told the whole truth. Octavia, not Lady Fenwick, not Madam. Octavia. The widow's eyes filled at once, with tears so prompt they might have been waiting outside with her carriage. "Damien," she whispered. "I'm sorry. I know I shouldn't have come without warning, but I didn't know where else to go." Verity stood between them, Duchess of Norleigh, wife-in-law, mistress of the house, and felt herself become the narrow strip of floor a man crossed to reach an old wound he still called love. Damien turned as if remembering her place in the scene only after another woman had entered it. "Verity," he said, and her name, after so long withheld, arrived like an accident. "This is Lady Octavia Fenwick." Verity inclined her head. "Lady Octavia." "Norleigh House is honored." Octavia's gaze moved over her, soft, measuring, and not uncertain at all. Her fingers closed around the brass key at her throat. "You are very kind, Your Grace." Her voice trembled. Her eyes did not. Some houses feel almost like home, even after years away. Damien said nothing. That silence told Verity more than confession. She looked from Octavia's key to the place beneath Damien's waistcoat, where his own had vanished. 2 keys, 1 locked room. A past preserved so carefully that the wife had not been allowed even to dust it. The dinner gong sounded from the back of the house, deep and formal, announcing the meal Verity had arranged for the evening her husband's first love returned. She smiled, because a duchess did not bleed in the entrance hall. Somewhere inside the quiet of her own chest, a thought stirred, unwelcome and strange. Perhaps one day someone would hear this silence and understand it was not peace. "Then you must come in," Verity said. "We should not let the cold follow you." Octavia crossed the threshold. Damien moved aside for her with care. Verity had not seen in years. As the door closed against the rain, Verity understood that Lady Octavia had not come merely seeking shelter from widowhood. She had come carrying a key. Lady Octavia Fenwick entered Norleigh House as if the rain had driven her there, but every step she took seemed to remember exactly where it wished to go. The footman closed the door behind her, shutting out the wet Mayfair street, and the entrance hall gathered itself around the three of them, with the terrible politeness of a room that knew a scene had begun. Verity saw the little tremor Octavia allowed into her shoulders once the cold was gone. She saw the careful tilt of the widow's chin, the way her black veil had been lifted just enough to reveal grief without concealing beauty, and the way Damien's gaze softened before he had the sense to hide it. Mourning had made Octavia interesting to him. Verity's loneliness, it seemed, had only made her efficient. "You are chilled," Damien said, stepping nearer. "You should not have come out in this weather." "I know," Octavia answered, and the faint break in her voice was almost perfect. "I told myself I would wait until morning. I truly did. But the house I am lodging in feels so strange, and tonight I remembered how safe Norleigh once felt. Once." The word entered the hall and took up more space than any guest had a right to claim. Verity turned to the butler before Damien could answer with tenderness that was not hers. "Mr. Vale, please have Lady Octavia's cloak taken to the warming room, Mrs. Ansell should prepare the blue chamber fire in case Lady Octavia requires rest after dinner." Octavia looked at her with wide eyes. "You are too generous, Your Grace. I don't want to impose." "Then you will find Norleigh House forgiving," Verity said. Damien's glance moved to her. He had heard the edge beneath the silk. "Good. Let him hear somethings, Mr. Vale removed Octavia's cloak with grave care. Beneath it, her morning gown was plain enough for propriety, and fitted enough for memory. Grey silk softened the throat. Jet beads caught the light. The brass key rested below them, tied on its black ribbon as calmly as a jewel. Verity wondered how many times Octavia had looked in the mirror before deciding exactly where that key should lie. "You were always careless of weather," Damien said. The words came from him without effort, a small familiarity, almost tender. Octavia smiled down at her gloves. "And you were always cross when I was." The footmen lowered their eyes. Servants were trained to become invisible, but invisibility did not make them deaf. Verity felt the humiliation of it travel through the hall. Not loud, not dramatic. Worse, domestic. Everyone present had just heard the Duke speak to another woman in the language of shared weather, shared youth, shared concern. To his wife he had said she had done well. "Dinner is ready," Verity said. "Lady Octavia, if you are equal to it, we would be honored by your company." "I shouldn't." Octavia looked at Damien, not at Verity. "I came at such an awkward hour." "You must eat," Damien said. "You are pale." Verity almost smiled. So many women in Norleigh House were pale tonight. Only one of them was treated as though it mattered. "Then it is settled," she said. "Mr. Vale, a third setting." "Already arranged, Your Grace," the butler replied. That answer should have pleased her. It did not. Her household had learned to prepare for wounds before they were named. They entered the dining room in an order that revealed more than etiquette intended. Verity walked first, because she was mistress of the house and hostess of the meal. Damien followed with Octavia on his arm, because she was wet, widowed, and apparently made of glass. The dining room glowed with candlelight and white roses. Silver reflected 3 faces where 2 had been expected. The place at Damien's right had been reset for Octavia. The footman had done it correctly. That was the cruelty. No one had made a mistake. Verity took her seat at the foot of the table. Damien sat at the head. Octavia sat beside him, close enough for old memories to pass between them without raising their voices. Soup was served. The first minutes were wrapped in the dull safety of polite inquiry, travel, rain, the difficulty of lodging after bereavement, the expected discomfort of returning to London society after a husband's death. Octavia answered with pauses that invited sympathy, though she never once lost command of the room. Sir Alistair Fenwick, she said, had been kind in his fashion. Older, yes, often unwell. His people in Surrey had been dutiful, though not warm. His settlement was not what had been promised, Damien asked. Verity kept her eyes on her spoon. It was too direct a question for a dinner table, but Octavia received it like an actress receiving a cue. Less than expected, she said. I do not wish to complain. Widows must learn quickly how little a promise is worth once the man who made it is buried. Damien's face darkened. You should have written to me. I couldn't. Why not? Octavia touched the key at her throat. Because there are doors one cannot reopen, simply because one is lonely. The room quieted. Even the footman setting wine near Damien's hand moved more slowly. Verity looked at the brass key. The gesture had been too exact. Not grief reaching for comfort, but a signal. Some doors remain closed for good reason, Verity said. Octavia turned toward her. Do you believe so? I believe a locked door usually tells us more about the person holding the key than about the room. Damien set down his glass. Verity. Her name again, used as warning. Octavia lowered her eyes. Please don't scold Her Grace on my account. I have made this evening uncomfortable. Not uncomfortable, Verity said. Informative. Damien's gaze sharpened, but the fish course arrived, and etiquette descended like a curtain pulled over a crack in the wall. Octavia began to speak of Norleigh House, as if sorrow had granted her permission to wander every corridor allowed. She remembered the yellow drawing room before the new paper. She remembered the conservatory when Damien's mother still kept orange trees there. She remembered summer evenings on the west terrace and winter mornings when coal smoke drifted beneath the music gallery door. Every recollection was offered softly. Everyone placed her deeper in the house than Verity had ever been allowed to stand. The West Music Gallery looked over the square, did it not? Octavia asked at last, her voice growing even more delicate. Damien did not answer immediately. It does. Still closed? Yes. Oh. Octavia's sorrow looked genuine for the first time, and somehow that made the wound more difficult to bear. I am sorry. I shouldn't have mentioned it. Verity lifted her eyes to Damien. I did not know there was a West Music Gallery. Octavia's expression opened, with what another woman might have mistaken for regret. Forgive me, Your Grace. I assumed as Duchess you would know every room. So did I, Verity said. Damien leaned back. It is an old room. Nothing more. Octavia's fingers closed around the key. Not nothing. The words were barely louder than breath. They landed all the same. Verity felt the humiliation then in its purest form. Not because Damien had loved before her. She had never demanded that his life begin at the altar. The wound was that he had preserved a room for that love, while allowing his marriage to become a corridor. Verity walked alone. She had managed linen, accounts, menus, repairs, tenantry letters, charitable visits, dinners, and the reputation of House Ireton. Yet a piece of the house had remained sealed away because it belonged to a tenderness he had not buried, only locked. Perhaps, Octavia said, turning to Damien with a trembling little smile, one day it might be opened again. Not for me, of course. For memory. Verity looked at her. Memory appears to require a great deal of accommodation. Damien's jaw tightened. The Duchess is tired. No, Verity said. Only learning. Lady Octavia lowered her lashes, but Verity saw the flicker beneath them. Annoyance, not pain. The discovery steadied her. The final course arrived. Octavia ate very little, spoke beautifully, and allowed Damien to notice each untouched bite. When coffee was offered, she pressed a hand to her temple. I fear I have been foolish. The journey and the rain have made me light-headed. Damien stood at once. You should sit by the drawing-room fire. No, please. I don't wish to trouble anyone. Her gaze moved to Verity. If Her Grace would be kind enough to manage the table, I might only steal a moment of warmth. Manage the table. Verity heard the phrase as clearly as if Octavia had risen and removed the Duchess's coronet herself. She looked to Damien. He had heard it. He did not correct it. His concern remained fixed on the woman at his right. So Verity smiled. A useful wife could do that. A wounded woman could do it better. Of course, she said. A duchess must be useful. Damien's eyes snapped to hers, but too late. Octavia's lips curved faintly, as if the first round of a quiet game had gone exactly as she had planned. Damien escorted Octavia to the drawing room. Verity remained in the dining room, while the servants cleared the evidence of a meal that had rearranged her life without raising a voice. The white roses had begun to droop in the heat. One petal fell beside Damien's untouched wineglass. Vale approached with a decanter in his hand, and the grave misery of a loyal servant who could not defend his mistress from her own husband. "Shall I close the dining room, Your Grace?" Verity looked toward the corridor that turned west, where a locked gallery waited with 2 keys in the house and none in her hand. "Not yet." Her voice was calm. That surprised her. "Please ask Mrs. Ansell whether the west wing has been dusted recently." Mr. Vale went still. "The west wing, Your Grace, yes." Verity picked up the fallen rose petal and laid it on the edge of her plate. "If a room remembers its true mistress, I should like to know what it has been told." By the following evening, the story had already left Norleigh House without Verity's permission. It travelled through Mayfair, as such stories did, not by announcement, but by gloved hands accepting calling cards, by footmen speaking too softly at servants' doors, by ladies pausing over tea, with the exact expression of people who wished to be shocked before dinner. Lady Octavia Fenwick had arrived in the rain. The Duke of Norleigh had received her. The Duchess had behaved beautifully. That last word was the most dangerous of all, because London used beautiful behavior as proof that a woman had no right to be wounded. Damien informed Verity of the evening's plan in the front drawing room, while a footman adjusted the lamps. He did not ask whether she wished to go. "Lady Marcham has offered Lady Octavia the use of her box at the opera," he said, fastening his cuffs. "We shall attend as well." Verity stood near the fireplace in ivory satin, her gloves folded over one wrist. She had chosen the gown because it gave society nothing to pity. "That is considerate of Lady Marcham. It will be useful for people to see there is no awkwardness." Verity looked at him through the warm light. "Will it? Do not take that tone, Verity." Inside those few words lay the entire discipline of their marriage. She was allowed sorrow if it remained quiet. She was allowed injury if it did not inconvenience him. She was allowed a name only when he wished to correct her. "What tone would you prefer?" she asked. "The one that assures London I'm grateful to stand beside you, while another woman proves there is no awkwardness." Damien's face hardened. "Octavia is vulnerable. So, as you have said. And you are Duchess of Norleigh. So everyone reminds me when they require me to be useful." He turned from the mirror then, and for a moment she thought he might answer as a husband rather than a duke, protecting the arrangement of his own comfort. Then the footman announced the carriage, and the moment closed. Damien offered his arm, because Mayfair could see even through curtains. Verity took it because dignity sometimes required touching the hand that had failed to hold yours. The opera house glittered with candlelight and expectation. Carriages lined the damp street outside, their lamps shining through mist. Inside, silk rustled along the staircases, fans opened like pale birds, and jewels caught the glow from chandeliers high above the red and gold tiers. Verity entered the Norleigh box beside Damien and felt the weight of every eye that pretended not to turn. Lady Octavia was already seated in Lady Marcham's neighbouring box. Mourning black framed her face with studied grace. The brass key rested low at her throat, half hidden by jet beads, visible enough to be seen by anyone who knew to look. Verity knew to look. Damien looked at Octavia first. That was another answer. Lady Marcham leaned across the division with a smile bright enough to cut glass. "Norleigh Duchess, how fortunate." "Lady Octavia was just telling me how brave one must be to return to music after sorrow." Octavia lowered her eyes. "I fear everything feels too bright after so much quiet." Damien moved a fraction nearer to the rail between the boxes. "You should leave if the noise troubles you." "No, don't fuss over me," Octavia said, with a soft laugh that invited fussing from every corner. "I'm quite well." Verity sat before anyone could make her the still center of someone else's tenderness. Below, the orchestra tuned. A violin drew one thin, aching note into the air, and the sound seemed to find the space beneath her ribs. The curtain rose. The first act began. On stage, a woman sang of devotion. In the neighboring box, Damien's attention leaned toward another widow's silence. Verity kept her gaze forward. A duchess could survive almost anything if she refused to become entertainment while doing it. During the interval, the house bloomed with conversation. Gentlemen bowed. Ladies leaned across box rails. Fans moved faster as speculation sharpened. Verity heard her own life return to her in fragments. Poor Duchess. So composed. Of course, theirs was never a love match. Lady Octavia was the great romance. A practical wife can be very useful in such families. Verity did not move. She had perfected the art of hearing insult without providing the satisfaction of response. Then a new presence entered Lady Marcham's box, and the air changed without sound. The gentleman who bowed over Lady Marcham's hand was tall, dark-haired, and dressed with severe simplicity. No ostentatious pin, no unnecessary ornament. Only a signet ring, a clean white cravat, and the kind of self-command that made louder men look poorly trained. Lady Marcham lifted her voice. "Duchess Norleigh, you know His Grace, the Duke of Alderwick, of course." Leander Beaumont bowed toward the Norleigh box. His gaze did not slide from Verity to Damien as most men's did. It rested on her with a steadiness that felt less like attention than recognition. "Your Grace," he said. Then to Damien Norleigh. Damien's nod was brief. Alderwick. The two names met like blades that had not yet been drawn. Lady Marcham smiled over her fan. "We were just praising old loyalties." "Lady Octavia has shown great courage tonight." Leander looked at Octavia's face, then at the brass key beneath her beads. The glance lasted no more than a heartbeat, but Verity saw it. More strangely, she felt that he had seen her seeing it. "Old loyalties can be demanding," he said. "One hopes they are also kind." Octavia touched the ribbon at her throat. "Kindness is sometimes all one has left. Then it should not be spent carelessly." His voice was mild. Octavia's smile thinned. Verity lowered her eyes, not to hide pain this time, but surprise. A small silence formed, and Lady Marcham, delighted by any silence that smelled of danger, turned it toward sport. "Lady Pevensey, you were saying something of household virtues." Lady Pevensey, seated just behind the partition in green silk, accepted the opening with pleasure. She was one of those women who believed cruelty became wit when delivered softly. "Only that the Duchess is admirable," she said, pitching her voice just high enough. "A practical duchess, if not a beloved one. Some women are born to manage linen, menus, and difficult evenings rather than hearts." The fan in Verity's hand stopped. The insult was not loud. It did not need to be. It crossed the neighboring boxes, settled in the pause between acts, and waited for Verity to smile under it. Damien did not speak. Octavia looked down with the expression of a woman too gentle to enjoy a wound she had not made, though her fingers closed again over the key. Verity felt the old instruction rise inside her. "Be gracious, be still. Do not embarrass him by revealing what he has allowed." Then Leander Beaumont turned toward Lady Pevensey. "I'm afraid I must disagree." The green silk rustled. "Your Grace, a woman who can preserve the dignity of a great house under every eye in London possesses more heart than those who mistake noise for feeling." The words landed cleanly. No raised voice, no vulgar defense. Just authority placed where Damien's silence had left an opening. Lady Pevensey colored. Lady Marcham's eyes gleamed. Damien's face went still in a way Verity knew too well. Octavia's hand tightened at her throat. Verity's own hand relaxed around her fan, one finger at a time. "How gallant," Lady Marcham murmured. "Not gallant," Leander replied. "Merely accurate." Verity looked at him then. It would have been wiser not to. But after years of being discussed, as if she were a household function, the shock of being accurately named was almost impossible to resist. "You are generous, Your Grace," she said. "No," he answered. "I've been observant." The second bell rang, calling the audience back from conversation to music. Guests returned to their places. The hall dimmed, the stage brightened. Verity's sat beside her husband, while a man who was not her husband had just defended the thing in her no one else had bothered to notice. Damien leaned slightly toward her under cover of the first aria. You seemed pleased by Alderwick's interference. Verity kept her gaze on the stage. I was pleased by its accuracy. He does not speak without purpose. Few dukes do. You should be cautious. At that, she turned. His face was half-shadowed by the curtain's reflected light. Of Lord Alderwick, of giving society something to discuss. She let one breath pass before answering. Society was already discussing me. The difference is that tonight someone spoke as though I were present. Damien's mouth tightened. He looked as if he wished to rebuke her, but could not find the correct form that would not sound exactly like guilt. Across the rail, Octavia leaned toward Lady Marcham, but her eyes flickered once toward Leander. Verity saw it, so did Leander. The act ended with applause, and the corridors filled again with people moving toward air, wine, and one another's secrets. In the press near the staircase, Verity became separated from Damien by Lady Marcham's party for only a few seconds. It was enough. Leander stepped aside near a column, giving her passage rather than taking it. Your Grace, Lord Alderwick, forgive me if I overstepped earlier. You didn't, she said, and the truth surprised her by escaping whole. I don't think anyone has done so little and given me so much room to breathe. Something in his expression softened, not into pity, but into understanding, held under firm control. Then I am glad I did little, she almost smiled. Almost. The moment was brief, proper, visible to anyone who cared to look, and still it felt more private than most rooms in her marriage. Leander's gaze moved, not to her throat or gown, but to her hands. Has His Grace ever heard you play, Duchess? The question struck with such precision that Verity forgot the opera house for a heartbeat. Around them, voices rose. A footman called for a carriage. Damien's voice sounded several yards away, speaking Octavia's name. Verity looked toward him, then back at the man who had heard an absence and named it without cruelty. No, she said. One word. 3 years. Leander bowed. Then he has been careless with more than a room. Before she could answer, Damien appeared beside her. Verity. Her name again, summoned because another man had stood near enough to hear her silence. Leander straightened. Norleigh. Damien's gaze moved between them. The carriage will be brought after the final act. Of course, Verity said. She turned with him, but not before seeing Octavia beyond his shoulder, watching from beneath her lifted veil, one hand pressed to the key at her throat. For the first time, Verity understood that Octavia was not merely guarding an old tenderness. She was afraid of what might happen if someone else recognized the woman Damien had left unheard. The West Music Gallery was opened because Octavia sighed over it at breakfast, as if memory itself had begun to ache. 3 mornings after the opera, Verity sat at the foot of the table with a stack of household notes beside her plate, listening while Lady Octavia described how music had once carried through the West Wing on winter afternoons. Damien stood near the window, already dressed for morning calls, one hand resting on the back of a chair he had not taken. He had avoided speaking of Lord Alderwick since the opera, but his silence had acquired edges. It watched Verity when he did not. It would be only a small gathering, Octavia said, stirring her chocolate without drinking it. Nothing grand. Lady Marcham thought a private musicale might be a comfort after so much talk. But I shouldn't have mentioned the gallery. Truly, I don't wish to disturb what has been closed. Verity looked up from the account book. Closed rooms are often disturbed by the people who remember them aloud. Octavia's spoon paused. Damien turned. The room can be prepared, can it? Verity asked. It has been shut for years. Then it is time it was aired. He said it with the calm authority of a man who had once told his wife that some rooms were better left undisturbed. Verity felt the old answer stand between them, but she did not let it take her voice. Very well, Mrs. Ansell will need 2 days. The chandeliers must be cleaned, the carpets beaten, and the pianoforte tuned if it still holds its tone. Octavia touched the brass key at her throat. It had the sweetest tone once. So I am told, Verity said. Damien's gaze sharpened. There is no need to make this difficult. No, Verity replied. Difficulty appears to have been preserved there quite well without my assistance. Octavia lowered her eyes at once. I am sorry. I keep causing pain without meaning to. Verity watched Damien, softened toward the apology, and understood with perfect clarity that Octavia had learned long ago how to make accusation sound like self-reproach. Pain is not always caused by the person who names it, Verity said. Sometimes it is caused by the person who asks everyone else not to notice. No one answered. The silence did not last. A duke's household was too disciplined for that. By Friday evening, Winston smelled of wax, lemon oil, and smoke newly coaxed into old chimneys. Verity had supervised the work herself. She stood beside Mrs. Ansell while dust sheets were folded, shelves wiped, lamps tested, and the long windows unlocked for the first time since before her marriage. The servants moved carefully, aware that they were cleaning not merely a room but an old claim. The West Music Gallery was long, high-ceilinged, and narrower than Verity had imagined. Windows overlooked the square, where carriage lamps glowed through early fog. A pianoforte stood on a shallow platform beneath a portrait of Damien's mother, its dark surface polished to mirror brightness. Along the walls, cabinets held bound music, loose scores, and small drawers with brass pulls. No room in Norleigh House had ever looked less abandoned. It had not been forgotten. It had been guarded. When the guests arrived, Verity received them at the gallery doors. Lady Marcham came first, delighted by any evening that promised emotion wrapped in propriety. A quiet baronet and his wife followed. Two elderly patronesses entered with lorgnettes and moral authority. Then came Leander Beaumont, Duke of Alderwick, with Lady Elspeth Marwood on his arm. Lady Elspeth's silver hair was dressed plainly, and her expression suggested she had survived too many drawing rooms to be impressed by one more. Leander bowed to Verity with restraint precise enough to defend them both. Your Grace, Lord Alderwick, Lady Elspeth. Norleigh House is honoured. Lady Elspeth looked around the room. A beautiful space, slightly resentful perhaps, but most neglected rooms become so. Verity found herself answering before caution arranged her words. Then I hope we have opened it before resentment became permanent. Leander's eyes rested on her for the smallest moment. Some rooms wait for the right listener. Across the gallery, Octavia entered on Damien's arm. She stopped just inside the threshold, and her breath caught. The sound was delicate, effective, and instantly believed by everyone who wished to believe it. Oh, she whispered, it is almost unchanged. Damien looked down at her. You remember it well, too well perhaps. She crossed to the shelves without asking, and drew out a bound volume as if her hand had known its place for years. Verity watched. Damien did not stop her. Octavia opened the music on the pianoforte. Do you remember this? Damien came nearer. You insisted it should be faster. It was too slow. It was impossible at your speed. You used to say impossible things were worth attempting. The guests smiled. Lady Marcham gave a soft murmur of pleasure. Verity stood near the door and felt herself pressed outside an intimacy staged in her own house. Then she saw the markings above the difficult passage. The ink had faded, but not enough. D and O, a correction in Damien's hand, a teasing note in another. Too quick for you, Your Grace. It should not have hurt. Men had pasts. Women did too, though society preferred theirs to be invisible. The wound was not that Damien had loved before her. It was that he had kept the evidence tender while letting his wife live without even knowledge of the shelf upon which it rested. You must play, Lady Marcham said. Octavia protested twice and accepted on the third invitation, as etiquette required. I'm terribly out of practice, she said. You mustn't expect anything, Lady Elspeth murmured. I have always found that warning unnecessary when offered so gracefully. Verity looked down to hide the swift, dangerous curve of a smile. Leander did not smile, but his eyes warmed. Octavia began. The opening was pretty, sentimental, and slow enough to invite sympathy. When the difficult passage came, she faltered. Her hand stumbled. She laughed softly. There, you see, I was better once. You were impatient once, Damien said. Perhaps I still am. Her eyes lifted to his. The wrong notes did not matter. The performance had never been about music. It was a room asking Damien to remember who he had been before he became a husband to someone else. Polite applause followed. Verity joined it because dignity required small lies at regular intervals. The gathering ended without overt disaster. Lady Marcham declared the gallery charming. The patronesses praised the restoration. Octavia allowed Damien to escort her to the corridor, where she paused long enough for everyone to see him bend his head toward her. Verity remained behind to ensure the candles were lowered and the music returned to order. That was what she did. She restored rooms after other people filled them with themselves. At last the servants withdrew. One lamp remained near the pianoforte. Verity should have left. Instead, she crossed to the instrument and looked at the open volume Octavia had failed to close. D&O waited above the passage like a private laugh. Verity removed her gloves. Her fingers touched the keys. The first chord answered uncertainly, then settled. She played the opening once, not as Octavia had played it, but as the music requested. Slower where it needed breath, stronger where sentiment had weakened it. When the difficult passage came, she did not hurry. The notes rose under her hands, clear and disciplined, then opened into something that felt painfully close to freedom. She reached the final chord before she realized anyone stood at the door. Leander remained on the threshold with Lady Elspeth beside him. He had not stepped into the room. That mattered. Lady Elspeth lifted a shawl from a chair with the air of a woman who had misplaced it by design. "Forgive us, Duchess. I left this behind and made my nephew hunt for it like a dutiful hound." Verity stood. "I did not hear you enter." "No," Lady Elspeth said. "People rarely hear anything properly when music finally tells the truth." Leander bowed, his voice low, but entirely proper. Lady Octavia played the memory of that piece. "You played the music." Heat touched Verity's face. "That is generous." "No," he said, "it is accurate." The word returned from the opera and passed between them like a candle protected from draught. No hand touched, no rule broke, yet the room felt altered because someone had witnessed her without taking anything. "We must go," Lady Elspeth said. "Auntly, virtue demands it." Leander bowed again. "Good evening, Your Grace." "Good evening, Lord Alderwick." They left, and the gallery fell quiet. Verity turned back to close the volume. As she lifted it, the carved edge of the music stand shifted beneath her hand. A faint click sounded behind the paneling. She froze. Slowly she pressed the loose piece near the left side of the pianoforte. A narrow panel gave way by less than an inch. Behind it, in a hollow dark with dust, lay a folded letter sealed with cracked red wax. Her breath caught. On the outside, in a hand she did not know, 3 words had been written above Damien's name. "Forgive me, beloved." For several seconds, Verity did not touch the letter. The West Music Gallery seemed to hold its breath around her, as if every polished surface, every silent cabinet, every line of music marked with Damien's old initials had been waiting years for the moment when the wife would find what the beloved had hidden. The cracked red wax bore no crest, only the pressure of a ring pressed hurriedly into softness. Damien's name had been written across the fold in a young woman's hand, dramatic and slanted, the letters more beautiful than steady. "Forgive me, beloved." Verity looked toward the corridor. The house beyond the gallery was quiet, but not empty. Octavia slept somewhere beneath this roof, or pretended to. Damien was in his study, perhaps remembering the music hail as a tender inconvenience endured for an old friend. No one would think to ask whether his wife remained in the room that had always known more about his heart than she did. She slid one finger beneath the loosened seal and opened the letter. "My dearest Damien, by the time you read this, I shall already have left London. I have tried to be braver than I am. I have tried to believe devotion can feed a life, protect a woman, silence creditors, and quiet a father who has counted every advantage since I was old enough to understand what beauty could buy. It cannot. Sir Alistair has offered what love, however dear, cannot promise: settlement security. A name that does not ask me to wait upon the uncertain favor of youth. Verity read the lines once, then again. Her first feeling was not triumph. It was confusion so sharp it nearly resembled pity. Octavia had not been dragged away by cruel family duty, not in the manner society had sighed over for years. She had chosen. Not perhaps freely in every sense, because women with fathers, debts, and expectations were rarely free. But she had chosen Sir Alistair's protection over Damien's devotion, and she had written the truth plainly before memory learned to dress itself in sacrifice. Verity turned the page. If I seemed tender, it was because I was tender, when tenderness cost nothing. You must despise me if it helps you marry well. A duke cannot spend his life waiting for a woman who was not brave enough to be poor beside him. The next line had been pressed more deeply into the paper, as if Octavia's hand had shaken. If ever I return, let it be after you have forgotten how useful you once wished to be to me. Useful. The word struck Verity harder than beloved. She looked toward the door again. No footsteps. Only the faint hiss of the lamp. She bent closer. The lower portion of the page had been folded inward, tucked into another smaller sheet. She drew it free, but the paper had caught against a nail inside the hidden panel. As she eased it loose, voices sounded in the corridor. One was Damien's. The other, softer and closer, was Octavia's. Verity folded the main letter quickly, but the smaller sheet tore in her hand. A narrow scrap remained between her fingers, no larger than a ribbon. She slipped it into the palm of her glove just as the gallery door opened. Octavia stood there with a lamp in her hand and the brass key at her throat. Her hair was perfectly dressed for a woman who claimed to be retiring early. Damien stood behind her, his expression already guarded. Octavia's gaze went first to the open panel, then to the letter in Verity's hand. Not surprise, fear. It appeared and vanished too swiftly for Damien to catch it. Verity caught it. "Your Grace," Octavia whispered. "What are you doing?" Verity turned fully, the letter still visible. Learning why this room was locked, Damien entered. Verity. There it was again. Her name used as command. Octavia placed a hand at her breast. "I came back for my shawl. I thought I heard someone moving. I didn't imagine." She stopped with admirable distress. "I didn't imagine Her Grace would be searching through private things." "Private things?" Verity said. "Hidden in my husband's house?" Damien held out his hand. "Give me the letter. Read it." His eyes hardened. "Give it to me. Read it first. This is not the manner of a wife." The words should not have surprised her. Still, something within her flinched, because the sentence had found an old bruise. "And what is the manner of a wife, Damien?" "To be seated at the table, while another woman names the rooms she owned before I knew they existed. To arrange candles for memories I was never permitted to question. To smile while she wears a key to my house at her throat." Octavia's eyes filled. "I knew this would happen. I knew my presence would wound you, but I never thought you would use old pain as a weapon." "Old pain?" Verity lifted the letter. "This is not pain. It is explanation." Damien stepped closer and took the letter from her hand. His fingers closed over it, but he did not open it. "There is nothing to be gained by ransacking the past. You have allowed the past to dine at your table, sleep under your roof, and correct your wife in front of servants. I think it has already been ransacked quite thoroughly." Octavia inhaled as if Verity had slapped her with a word. "Damien, please. Don't let her read private grief aloud. I was young. I was frightened. My father was impossible. Sir Alistair was convenient to everyone but me." "That is not what the letter says," Verity said. Damien looked at her then, and for one dangerous second she thought he might open it. He looked down at the folded pages. Octavia's fingers tightened around the lamp handle. The flame trembled. "Damien," she said softly, "if you once cared for me at all, don't make me stand here while your wife judges the worst hour of my life." He closed his hand over the letter. Verity felt the choice before he spoke it. Enough, the word did not rise, it fell. You had no right to pry. The room seemed to settle around the verdict. The old room, the old music, the old beloved, and the wife made unbecoming because she had touched the truth. "No right?" she asked. "This is Norleigh House. It is my family's house. And I am what then?" A tenant with better gowns? His face tightened. Do not make this vulgar. Octavia lowered her head. I should go. I have caused trouble enough. Damien turned toward her with immediate concern. You have caused nothing. Verity laughed once. It was a small sound without humor, and all three of them seemed startled by it. How extraordinary. I touch a hidden letter and cause disgrace. Lady Octavia enters my home with a key to a locked room and causes nothing. Damien's voice cooled. This jealousy diminishes you. For a moment, Verity could not breathe. Not because the insult was loud, but because it was neat. Men like Damien loved neat conclusions. Jealousy made her small. Jealousy made the letter irrelevant. Jealousy excused him from reading. She looked at Octavia. The widow's eyes were wet, but beneath the tears, something watched, intent and waiting. Verity understood then that Octavia did not need Damien to love her perfectly. She needed him to distrust his wife long enough to keep the letter folded. You think this is jealousy, Verity said. I think it is truth. You have not yet had the courage to read. Damien's jaw set. You will return to your rooms, will I? Now. And the letter. It will remain with me. Verity looked at his closed fist. Then at least open your hand enough to know what you are defending. Octavia made a soft sound, wounded and effective. Damien did not open his hand. Mr. Vale will lock the gallery in the morning. Until then, no one enters without my permission. Your permission, Verity repeated. Not mine. You have shown why permission is necessary. There was no answer that dignity could make without becoming pleading. Verity turned to leave, her torn scrap hidden against her palm inside the glove. At the threshold, Octavia spoke. Your Grace? Verity stopped, but did not turn. I hope one day you'll understand that some memories are painful because they were sincere. Verity looked back then. The lamp lit Octavia's face from below, softening the tears and sharpening the calculation behind them. And some memories survive, because no one has been allowed to question who arranged them. Damien made a sound of warning, but she had already gone. She walked through the west corridor with measured steps, past portraits that had watched wives endure worse, and servants carry secrets down back stairs. Only when she reached her own chamber did she remove the glove. The torn scrap lay against her palm, creased and warm. She unfolded it beneath the candle. The handwriting was cramped, as if Octavia had written quickly where shame could not be dressed. Tell no one of the debt. If Damien learns why I accepted Sir Alistair, he will despise me, and I cannot bear to be despised by a man who may one day still be useful. Verity sat down slowly. Useful, not beloved, not lost. Useful, in the gallery below. Damien held the letter but not the truth. Octavia held the key but not the whole past. Verity held only a torn scrap of paper. Yet, for the first time since the widow entered Norleigh House, the smallest thing in the room belonged to the woman who had been told she had no right to know. By noon the next day, Verity learned that Lady Octavia did not only collect keys, she removed witnesses. The discovery came not in the drawing room, where grief wore black silk and lowered its lashes, but at the servants' entrance, where a young housemaid stood with a small bundle clutched to her chest and eyes red from trying not to weep. Verity had come down the back stairs because Mrs. Ansell had sent word that the new linen accounts required approval before the charity committee that afternoon. Instead, she found the housekeeper near the green baize door, her mouth tight with helpless anger, while Mr. Vale stood beside her with the rigid posture of a man forced to obey an order he disliked. The maid was Ruth Bell, a neat, quiet girl of 19 who had once stayed awake half the night nursing a kitchen maid through fever because the doctor could not come until morning. What has happened? Verity asked. Ruth dropped into a curtsy so low her bundle nearly struck the floor. Your Grace, Mrs. Ansell's expression warned caution, but Verity had spent too many years being cautious where caution protected everyone except the vulnerable. Answer me plainly. Mr. Vale bowed. His Grace has ordered Bell dismissed, Your Grace. For what offence? The butler's gaze moved toward the corridor. Lady Octavia reported that Bell entered her chamber without knocking and misplaced a mourning ribbon. Ruth's face crumpled. I knocked twice, Your Grace. I swear it. And I didn't take no ribbon. I was sent to the west corridor last night because Lady Octavia said her shawl had been forgotten after the music hale. I was halfway there when I saw her come out of the gallery before His Grace came down. She had the key in her hand, and she looked. The girl stopped, terrified by her own honesty. Verity felt the torn scrap hidden in her reticule as if it had warmed against her side. Looked how? Ruth swallowed. Not like a lady who'd just remembered a shawl. Like one who'd found what she'd feared was gone. Mrs. Ansell closed her eyes for one brief instant. Mr. Vale's hand tightened around the silver tray he carried. The household knew. Not all of it, perhaps, but enough. Enough to make Ruth dangerous. Verity turned to the maid. You will not leave by the alley like a thief. Ruth stared at her. Your Grace, Mrs. Ansell, bring writing paper and my seal. Mr. Vale, delay the carriage at the front for 10 minutes. For Lady Octavia's drive, Your Grace. For whatever drive was meant to carry this girl out of my house without a character. The butler bowed with a gravity that was almost gratitude. Within minutes, Verity stood at the small table near the housekeeper's room and wrote a reference in a hand no employer could dismiss. Ruth Bell, formerly in service at Norleigh House, has conducted herself with diligence, honesty, and kindness. Any household that values steadiness will find her worthy of trust. She sanded the ink and sealed the letter with the Duchess's crest. The crest had felt like costume for years. In that moment, it felt like a shield. Ruth accepted it with shaking fingers. I don't know how to thank you. By keeping yourself safe. Verity lowered her voice. You saw nothing unless asked by someone with the right to protect you. Until then, you are not dismissed for dishonesty. You are leaving with my recommendation. But His Grace has been mistaken before. Mrs. Ansell drew in a breath, but Verity did not take the sentence back. She directed Ruth to a respectable lodging kept by Mrs. Vale's widowed sister near Marylebone, then instructed that the girl be placed on the list for charitable employment. Ruth left by the front door, not the servants' door, with Verity's seal in her hand. Across the hall, Damien's study remained closed. Above stairs, Octavia's bell rang once, high and impatient. Verity listened to it, and felt a cold steadiness settle inside her. A woman who lied about a ribbon could lie about a letter. A woman who had a maid dismissed for seeing a corridor could ruin a duchess for knowing a room. The charity committee met that afternoon in a sober house near Cavendish Square, where moral purpose made the chairs hard and the tea weak. Verity arrived with Mrs. Alder as companion and the list of women seeking respectable employment folded inside her portfolio. The room was full of elderly patronesses, clergymen's wives, and ladies who believed poverty could be improved if only it wore cleaner cups. Lady Elspeth Marwood sat at the far end of the table, sharpening a pencil with the intensity of a judge preparing sentence. Leander Beaumont stood behind her chair, reviewing subscription papers. His presence made several women sit straighter. He did not look toward Verity until she had greeted the room and taken her place. Then he bowed, exact and formal. Your Grace, Lord Alderwick. Lady Elspeth looked over her spectacles. Duchess, you are just in time. We have been deciding whether poor girls need hymn books more urgently than coal. I have argued that freezing women rarely sing well. A few ladies laughed because a duchess's aunt might be eccentric, but a duke's aunt could afford to be correct. Verity opened her portfolio. I have brought the name of a young woman seeking placement. She is industrious and kind. Kindness, Lady Elspeth said, is more useful in service than half the accomplishments taught to young ladies at twice the cost. Verity drew out Ruth's note, and with it, the narrow scrap from Octavia's letter slipped free. It fell near the edge of the table, writing downward. Verity reached for it at once, but Leander had already seen the paper. He did not touch it until she nodded. That restraint, even in so small a matter, struck her with uncomfortable force. Damien would have demanded. Leander waited. She slid the scrap toward him under cover of the employment list. His gaze moved over the torn edge, then the faint watermark visible against the afternoon light. His expression changed, not enough for gossip, but enough for her. "This paper," he said softly. "It is not from a lady's private stationery." Verity kept her voice low. "You recognize it? Harrow and Pike, solicitors near Lincoln's Inn. They used a crest watermark on packets for private settlements and debt arrangements. I have seen it on estate matters." The name entered her like another key turning. Fenwick matters. Leander's eyes met hers. "I would not say so without proof. But you suspect it." "I know Sir Alistair Fenwick's affairs were more troubled than his widow allows society to believe. And I know Harrow and Pike handled at least one arrangement meant to keep embarrassment out of print." Verity folded her hands over the employment list. Around them, ladies debated blankets and chapel attendance. The world continued its polite business, while truth gathered itself in torn paper. "Lord Alderwick," she said, "if this connection becomes known, Lady Octavia will say I have conspired with you. Then we must make certain everything passes through proper channels and in public rooms." His answer came without hesitation. "I can ask Lady Elspeth to speak to your aunt, if you have one in town you trust, or to any solicitor you appoint. I will not hold evidence for you privately." It was the most honorable refusal she had ever received. "You are very careful. Not careful enough, perhaps." His gaze moved past her shoulder. Verity followed it, and saw Lady Pevensey entering with a rustle of green silk and a smile that made apology unnecessary, because it had never been intended. Behind her stood a narrow-faced maid, holding a muff and folded shawl. The maid's eyes dropped too quickly from the table. Had she seen the scrap? Had she heard the name Harrow and Pike? Lady Pevensey came forward. "Duchess, how admirable to find you here. One hears so many things in London, but charity is always the safest occupation for a lady whose household has become." "Interesting." Lady Elspeth's pencil snapped. "Lady Pevensey, I am delighted you have come. We were just discussing warmth for women with nowhere safe to sleep. A subject that requires more heart than wit." The green silk stiffened. "How very improving." Verity placed Ruth Bell's name on the employment list and pushed it toward the secretary. "Please add this young woman. She is to be considered for respectable placement at once." Lady Pevensey glanced at Leander, then at the papers near Verity's hand. "How fortunate her grace is to have such capable assistants." Leander answered before Verity needed to. "The committee assists many women, Lady Pevensey. It is the point of its existence." "Of course." But her eyes had sharpened. By the time the meeting ended, Verity knew the danger had already left the room ahead of her. She saw Lady Pevensey's maid pause beside the door as Verity gathered her portfolio. She saw the girl lean toward a footman waiting in the hall. Her whisper was not meant for Verity, but the corridor carried it back all the same. "Tell Lady Fenwick it was paper from the Duchess's reticule. Lord Alderwick named the solicitors. Harrow and Pike." Verity did not turn, neither did Leander, only Lady Elspeth looked up, and her eyes became very bright. Verity closed her portfolio slowly. She had come to the committee to save one dismissed maid. She left knowing Octavia would soon understand that the wife she had tried to shame now held a scrap of truth, a witness with a reference, and the name of the men who had once put Lady Octavia's debts into respectable ink. By the night of Lady Marcham's charity musicale, the rumour had reached the assembly rooms before Verity's carriage turned into the square. It waited beneath the chandeliers, tucked behind painted fans and softened by perfume, made prettier by ladies who had never touched truth unless it arrived folded in gossip. The Duchess of Norleigh had been seen at a charity committee with the Duke of Alderwick. Papers from her reticule had been handled. A solicitor's name had been spoken, Harrow and Pike. By the time Verity stepped from the carriage with Damien beside her, and Octavia following in mourning black, half the room believed there was a secret, and the other half had come, hoping to see it bleed through silk. "You need not stay long," Damien said, his voice low enough for only Verity to hear. "If you appear tired, we can leave after the first performance." Verity looked at the white gloves folded over her fan. How thoughtful. Shall I look tired before or after Lady Pevensey has explained why? His jaw tightened. Do not begin the evening defensively. I did not begin it. Octavia's voice floated from behind them, soft as a ribbon drawn across a blade. Please don't quarrel on my account. I'm sure tonight will be peaceful if everyone wishes it so. Verity turned. The brass key lay against Octavia's throat, its dull shine visible between jet beads. Peace usually requires more than a wish. Octavia lowered her eyes. Damien offered his arm to the widow as they entered, because a woman in mourning must not appear abandoned before a crowd. Verity walked beside them without support, which suited the room perfectly. It preferred her alone. Lady Marcham received them at the entrance to the great room, with a smile sharpened by appetite. Duchess, how gracious of you, Norleigh. Dear Lady Octavia, you look very brave. I don't feel brave, Octavia said. Then you must borrow the room's admiration. There is plenty of it tonight. Lady Marcham's gaze flicked toward Verity, then beyond her. Verity followed it and saw Leander Beaumont standing near the platform with Lady Elspeth Marwood. He did not come toward her at once. That restraint steadied her more than any greeting could have done. He bowed across the room with proper distance, and Lady Elspeth lifted her chin in a manner that made three patronesses nearby straighten as though inspected. The assembly rooms were crowded, though the charity in question served girls seeking respectable employment and should have been dull enough to discourage anyone unkind. A small platform had been arranged near the far wall. Music stands waited beside a polished pianoforte. On a table near the entrance sat a subscription book, a bowl for donations, and a list of households willing to take trained girls into service. Verity saw Ruth Bell's name added in a careful hand. The sight gave her a quiet strength no jewel could have provided. A dismissed maid had not vanished, not yet. The first performances were harmless. A baronet's daughter sang too high. A vicar's wife played too quickly. A young lady in pink forgot one verse of a Scottish air and was rescued by her mother's loud cough. Verity stood with Damien near the side of the room, while Octavia sat close to Lady Marcham, accepting sympathy in small doses. Several times, Verity felt eyes move from her to Leander, then to the pianoforte, then back again. The trap had not sprung, but she could hear its hinge. Lady Pevensey opened it. She rose after the second song, with her fan pressed to her breast. Lady Marcham, before the evening grows too late, I hope we might persuade Her Grace the Duchess of Norleigh to favour us. We have all heard such praise of her musical judgment. The room turned. Verity felt Damien stiffen beside her. Octavia's lashes lowered. On the music stand, already placed as if by accident, lay the piece from the West Gallery. The same opening, the same difficult passage. The same memory marked once, with Damien and Octavia's initials now cleaned of visible accusation by a fresh copy. It was elegant cruelty. If Verity refused, she would appear proud, wounded, jealous. If she played poorly, Octavia's old intimacy would triumph. If she played well, they would ask who had inspired her. And Lady Pevensey already had an answer waiting. Damien leaned close. You need not do this. Verity looked at him. His concern came too late and pointed in the wrong direction. He feared embarrassment. She feared disappearance. No, she said. I need not. Then she stepped forward. A murmur ran through the room, quiet and hungry. Lady Marsham's smile brightened. How generous, Duchess. For the charity, Verity said. Not for curiosity. That cooled several faces. Not enough. She reached the platform and saw the music waiting. For one breath, her fingers remembered the hidden panel, the torn scrap, Octavia's voice calling truth a weapon. The room narrowed. Then Leander moved. He did not rush. He did not rescue. He approached Lady Marcham first and bowed. With your permission, I can turn pages for Her Grace. The passage is awkward, and the charity should not suffer from poor mechanics. Lady Marcham's eyes flashed with interest. How considerate, Alderwick. Lady Elspeth spoke from her chair. And witnessed by half London, which should satisfy even the most imaginative among us. A few people laughed because they were afraid not to. Verity looked at Leander as he took his place beside the pianoforte, close enough to help, far enough to remain beyond reproach. "You need not," she said softly. "I know. Then why do you?" His gaze stayed on the music. "Because no woman should be forced to choose between humiliation and solitude, when a simple page turn will do." Verity sat. Her hands hovered above the keys. The room waited for failure. She began. At first, the notes sounded too clear, almost exposed. Then the music settled beneath her fingers and became steadier than her breath. She did not play Octavia's memory. She did not play Damien's regret. She played the piece as if it belonged to no one until the moment a woman chose to make it honest. The difficult passage approached. Leander turned the page exactly when needed, his hand withdrawing before it drew attention. Verity felt the support as one feels a lamp in a dark hall, not as touch, but as proof that space has been made safer. The passage opened. She did not hurry. Each note landed with quiet authority. The final phrase rose, not triumphant, not pleading, but free of the sentimental weakness Octavia had draped over it. When the last chord faded, silence held. Then Lady Elspeth began to clap. Once. Twice. The patronesses joined her. Lady Marcham followed because taste required it. Then the room, which had waited to see a duchess diminished, applauded the woman it had been instructed to doubt. Verity looked up. Leander bowed his head slightly, not claiming the success, only acknowledging that she had kept it. Against wisdom, she smiled at him. It was small, unguarded, grateful. From the upper gallery, where gentlemen had gathered for air and brandy, Damien saw it. He had not seen Verity smile like that at his table, in his carriage, or across his drawing room. The expression was not flirtation. That would have been easier to condemn. It was relief. It was what a woman looked like when she had been heard before she had to defend the sound of her own voice. The applause continued, and something cold and unfamiliar moved through him. Not merely jealousy, recognition, arriving late and unwelcome. Below, Leander stepped away from the pianoforte before anyone could mistake propriety for possession. As Verity left the platform, he turned his attention toward the side passage near the musician's room. Octavia stood there, with a narrow man in a dark coat who carried a leather portfolio. The man bowed too quickly when Leander's gaze found him. He retreated through the service door. Leander's eyes sharpened. Harrow and Pike had sent clerks to worse rooms than this one. Verity reached Lady Elspeth, who squeezed her hand once, then released it, before sentiment became spectacle. Lady Pevensey approached with a smile that had lost its first confidence, but none of its malice. Exquisite Duchess. One wonders where such feeling has been hiding. Octavia came to stand beside her. Perhaps her grace has found consolation where others least expected. The words were soft enough to sound wounded, and clear enough to poison. The applause died in patches. Verity looked at Octavia. Before she could answer, Damien descended from the upper gallery. His face was controlled, but the control had gone white at the edges. He crossed the room with the authority of a man who had mistaken command for dignity all his life. Leander moved half a step, then stopped. Verity saw him choose restraint in public, though anger had touched his eyes. Damien stopped before his wife. "My wife will return home with me now." The room held its breath again. Octavia lowered her gaze, one hand resting on the brass key, as if it were a prayer. Verity felt every eye waiting to learn whether she would obey, protest, or break. She lifted her chin. "Of course, Your Grace," she said. "The charity has had its music. Now society may have its scene." Damien's command did not pull Verity from the assembly room so much as place her in the center of it. For one terrible second, after he said she would return home with him, no one moved. The last applause from the charity performance seemed to die against the curtains. Lady Marcham's smile sharpened with the satisfaction of a hostess whose evening had become more valuable than the subscriptions. Lady Pevensey lowered her fan by half an inch. Octavia stood with one gloved hand at her throat, fingers resting on the brass key, her eyes wide and injured for the benefit of every woman, willing to confuse theatre with sorrow. Leander Beaumont remained near Lady Elspeth, still enough that restraint itself seemed to have taken human form. Verity saw his hand close once at his. Then open, he did not step forward. He did not make her scandal larger by placing himself in it. That, more than any speech, steadied her. Damien's gaze moved over the room, as if he could command gossip into obedience by refusing to acknowledge it. "The carriage," he said to a footman. At once. Verity descended the platform steps without haste. She passed Lady Elspeth, who said nothing but held her eyes with fierce approval. She passed Leander, who bowed as any gentleman might bow to any duchess in a public room. Only his voice, low and exact, reached her. "Your choice remains yours." Verity did not look back. "I know." Damien heard enough to stiffen. Octavia heard enough to understand she had not won everything yet. At the entrance, Lady Marcham murmured, "Such a pity." The music was quite moving. Verity turned her head. "Then, remember the music, Lady Marcham. It would be unfortunate if the scene proved louder." A few mouths tightened. The warning was mild. It landed. Outside, the night air struck cold after the heat of bodies and suspicion. The carriage lamps made the wet street shine like black glass. Damien handed Octavia in first. Verity watched the gesture. It was correct for a widowed guest. It was also another small public answer. He helped Verity after, but his hand barely touched hers, and she preferred it that way. Inside the carriage, Octavia pressed a handkerchief to her lips. "I am so sorry. I should never have attended. I only wished to support the charity, and now everyone will say I caused trouble." "Will they?" Verity asked. "Or will they say I did?" Damien sat opposite her, shoulders rigid. "That depends on what you choose to encourage. I played a piece of music. You allowed Alderwick to place himself beside you before the entire room. He turned pages. He made himself necessary." Verity looked at him through the dim sway of carriage light. No Lady Pevensey and Lady Octavia made assistance necessary. Lord Alderwick merely made it possible without humiliation. Octavia drew a breath, as if the words had hurt her. "I didn't know they would ask you to play. Truly, I didn't. When I saw the music, I thought perhaps Lady Marcham had chosen it because of the gallery. I never meant." "You never mean anything until it succeeds," Verity said. Damien's eyes flashed. "Enough, yes," Verity replied. "That is what I have told myself for years." He leaned forward. "You forget yourself." "No. I am beginning to remember." Octavia's face turned toward the carriage window. Her reflection in the dark glass looked less tearful than irritated. Damien did not see it. He was looking at Verity with a confusion that would have been almost satisfying if it had not arrived so late. "You smiled at him," he said. There it was. The truth beneath the command. Not charity. Not propriety. Not society's possible whisper. A smile. A small, unguarded thing he had not earned and had therefore decided to condemn. "Are you angry because I was false?" Verity asked. "Or because someone finally listened?" Octavia whispered. "Damien, please, she's upset." "Don't answer while she's upset." Verity turned to her. "You may stop translating my dignity as distress." The carriage fell silent. When Norleigh House came into view, its lit windows looked less like home than an argument kept polished. "Mr. Vale opened the door with his usual grave precision. But Verity saw his eyes move quickly from her face to Damien's, and then to Octavia's hand still resting at her throat. The servants knew how to read weather before storms were named. Damien entered first. Octavia followed, leaning just enough for him to notice. Verity came after them, removed her gloves, and placed them in Clara's waiting hands. "Have hot tea sent to the drawing room," Damien said. "Lady Octavia is shaken." "No," Verity said. The word stopped even the footman near the stair. Damien turned. "I beg your pardon?" I said no. "Lady Octavia may have tea if she wishes. I will not sit in the drawing room and help convert what happened tonight into another scene of her suffering." Octavia's eyes filled at once. "I don't want to be the cause of this." "Then you have been remarkably unfortunate in your results." Damien stepped toward Verity. "My study now." Verity did not move. "No." The entrance hall seemed to grow larger around that single word. Mr. Vale lowered his eyes. Mrs. Ansell appeared near the corridor and went utterly still. "You will not summon me like a housemaid to be corrected out of sight," Verity said. If you have an accusation, speak it where your household can hear what you permit. Damien's face darkened. You are making yourself ridiculous. I was ridiculous when I believed patience would someday become love. Octavia made a soft sound, but no one attended to it. For the first time, the room belonged to the wife's voice. Damien looked toward the west corridor. Mr. Vale, your grace, the west music gallery is to be locked at once. No servant is to enter. No guest is to enter. No one touches the music there without my permission. Verity felt something inside her go very quiet. Because I played well. Because that room has become a source of disorder. That room became disorder when another woman entered my house wearing a key to it. Damien's hand went to his watch chain. The brass key still hung there, though Verity knew Octavia's match lay at her throat. For a moment she thought he might put it away, ashamed at last. Instead he unclasped it. He crossed the hall to Octavia and placed the key in her hand. You will keep yours, he said, voice controlled but hard. And this one? There are memories in that room you have more right to than anyone here understands. The humiliation did not strike loudly. It entered with the soft click of metal against Octavia's glove. Mrs. Ansell's face changed. Mr. Vale's mouth tightened. Clara looked down so quickly that Verity knew the girl might cry if she looked longer. Damien had not merely defended Octavia. He had given her custody of the very room he denied his wife, and he had done it before the household Verity had preserved for him. Octavia curled her hand around both keys. Damien, perhaps not now. Her grace is upset. Verity looked at her. No, I am very clear. Damien turned back. You will retire. We will speak when you have recovered yourself. I have recovered myself enough to know I shall not sleep under a roof where locked rooms receive more fidelity than I do. The words landed in the hall with the finality of a door closing. Damien stared at her. What are you saying? I am going to Lady Salcombe. At this hour? Absurd. Then think me absurd. It will be a change from useful. Octavia took one quick step forward. Surely you won't leave because of me. No, Verity said. I am leaving because of him. Damien's face lost some color. For the first time that night, uncertainty entered him. It was not enough. Verity, her name came without command this time. That almost hurt more. You cannot mean to walk out of Norleigh House over a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding requires two people trying to understand each other. You have spent this evening trying to control what other people might see. She turned to Clara. Pack one trunk. Grey walking dress, 2 evening gowns, correspondence case, and the blue cashmere shawl. Mrs. Alder is to be asked whether she will accompany me to Wimpole Street. Clara curtsied at once. Yes, Your Grace. Mrs. Ansell moved before Damien could forbid it. I shall see to the cloak, Your Grace. Mr. Vale bowed. The closed carriage can be ready within minutes. Damien looked around at his own servants and found them obeying his wife with a loyalty he had never had to earn, because she had earned it for him. Society will ask why, he said. Verity opened her reticule. Inside lay the torn letter scrap, the copied music page, Ruth Bell's placement record, and the name Harrow and Pike written in her own careful hand. She closed it again. Good, she said. Let them ask. Octavia's fingers tightened around the keys. Damien saw it then. Not the whole truth, not yet, but the shape of his own failure reflected in brass and silence. Verity did not wait for him to understand. She climbed the staircase with her head high, not as a wife fleeing scandal, but as a duchess deciding which door she would close. By morning, Verity's absence had become the most carefully discussed fact in London, and London had dressed its curiosity in calling cards. Lady Salcombe's house in Wimpole Street possessed none of Norleigh House's ducal grandeur, yet its narrow front door closed with a firmness Verity had not known a door could offer. She had slept only a few hours in a plain room overlooking a small winter garden, but when she woke, no bell summoned her to arrange another woman's comfort. No husband's silence waited outside the chamber like a verdict. At breakfast, Lady Salcombe sat beneath a severe portrait of her late husband and examined the cards delivered by the morning post as if sorting evidence. 3 cowards, 2 sympathizers, 1 woman of sense, "And one anonymous insect," she said. Verity set down her cup. "Anonymous?" Her aunt handed her a folded note. No crest marked the paper. The hand was disguised, though not skillfully enough to hide malice. The Duchess who fled should remember that a wife who leaves her husband's roof often finds another roof already named for her. Verity read it twice. The first reading hurt, the second clarified. "They have already decided Lord Alderwick is the roof. People with empty heads enjoy putting respectable women into furnished scandals," Lady Salcombe said. "It saves them the labor of thought." Verity folded the note and placed it beside her plate. "Lady Octavia arrived at my house wearing a key." Damien placed the second key in her hand before the servants. "Yet society will wonder whom I have wronged. Because society forgives a widow for being fragile before it forgives a wife for becoming inconvenient." Lady Salcombe rang the bell. "That is why Mr. Pember will come at noon. I had not asked you to summon sound." "No. You had only arrived near midnight, with a companion, a pale maid, a reticule full of clues, and the face of a woman who has finally discovered patience is not a religion." I made an inference despite everything. Verity nearly smiled. When Mr. Pember arrived, he brought the air of a man who had spent 40 years teaching scandal to speak in proper phrases. He was thin, precise, and unseduced by drama. That recommended him at once. Lady Salcombe remained in the room with her knitting untouched on her lap, because protection sometimes looked like a witness. "Your Grace, Mr. Pember said after bowing. "I understand you seek advice concerning separate residence and possible further proceedings." Verity held her hands steady. "I seek truth first. Freedom after, if truth permits it. A wise order." He opened his notebook. "A deed of separation may be negotiated if His Grace agrees to residence apart and provision. Should matters advance beyond that, a petition is possible, but I must be plain. The law does not weigh husband and wife equally. For a wife, misconduct must be supported by additional grounds, admitted facts, or sworn statements strong enough that counsel can proceed without turning your life into common entertainment." "My life already seems to have become entertainment," Verity said. "Then our task is to make it evidence instead." She removed the torn scrap from her reticule, along with the copied music page, Ruth Bell's placement record, and the written name Harrow and Pike. Mr. Pember read the scrap. His expression remained professional, but his fingers stilled on the paper. "This is Lady Octavia's hand." "I believe so. And this was torn from a hidden letter found in the West Music Gallery at Norleigh House." "Yes. Who else knows of it?" "The Duke of Norleigh holds the larger letter. He took it from me and did not read it in my presence. Lady Octavia saw me with it. Lord Alderwick recognized the watermark later, in a charity committee room, but he did not keep the scrap. He advised proper channels." Mr. Pember's gaze lifted. "Lord Alderwick's name will be used if it can be used." "I know." Her throat tightened, but she did not look away. "He has been more careful with my reputation than my husband has been with my peace." Lady Salcombe's needles clicked once, though no stitch had been made. Mr. Pember inclined his head. "Then we shall keep his assistance where it belongs, not in whispers, in witnessed statements. Lady Elspeth Marwood may confirm the committee room exchange. I shall write to Harrow and Pike regarding Fenwick obligations, prior correspondence, and any packets sent before Lady Octavia entered Norleigh House. I shall also write to His Grace's man of business regarding your residence here." Verity looked at the anonymous note again. The words no longer frightened her as much as they tired her. "If I sign, there is no returning to silence." Mr. Pember placed a single sheet before her. "There is often no returning to silence once a woman learns what it has cost her." The pen lay beside the paper. Verity took it. For 3 years her signature had ordered dinners, paid tradesmen, approved linens, answered tenants, and preserved the shape of Damien's consequence-free dignity. Now the ink would begin something for herself. Her hand trembled once, then steadied. Lady Verity Ireton, Duchess of Norleigh. She sanded the line and watched the black grains darken where her name had claimed the page. Across Mayfair, Damien received Mr. Pember's first communication before tea. "Mr. Vale brought it into the study on a silver tray with the discretion of a man carrying a lit coal. Damien read the name twice. Pember and Calthorpe, solicitors. Counsel instructed by Her Grace. Separate residence, inquiry. Provision. His first feeling was anger, clean and familiar. His second was not. It slipped beneath the anger before he could name it. Fear, perhaps. Or the humiliation of discovering that a wife he had always assumed would remain had learned the road to a solicitor without asking his permission. Octavia sat near the fire in mourning silk, though no one had invited her to the study. Since Verity's departure, she had made fragility a form of residence. The 2 brass keys were hidden somewhere about her gown. Damien had not asked where. That suddenly irritated him. "What is it?" she asked. He folded the letter. "Verity has instructed counsel." Octavia's face whitened beautifully. "Counsel? But that's absurd." She left in anger. Apparently not too much anger to choose a solicitor. "You must stop this at once." The urgency in her voice was sharper than sorrow. Damien looked up. "Must I?" "Of course. If she is allowed to shape the story, everyone will ask why she left. They'll say you drove her out. They'll say I had some part in it. Did you?" Her eyes filled. He noticed the speed of it. Once, tears had ended his questions. Now he saw the beginning of them. "How can you ask me that? Belle was dismissed yesterday." Octavia blinked. "The maid? She claimed you sent her to the west corridor. She entered my chamber without knocking. For a ribbon." "Yes, a ribbon important enough to cost a girl her place." Octavia rose. "Damien, you're tired and humiliated, and Verity knows it. She's using your guilt. She's using Alderwick, don't you see? A woman who leaves a duke's house does not go alone, unless someone has already told her where to stand." The words should have fed his jealousy. Instead, they returned him to the assembly room, to Leander stepping close enough to turn a page, and far enough not to touch his wife's reputation. He remembered Verity's smile. Not a lover's smile. Relief. The distinction angered him, because he could not unknow it. "Alderwick has been careful," Damien said. Octavia's expression shifted before she mastered it. "Careful men can be the most dangerous, and careless women," the room chilled. Octavia looked toward the window. "I don't deserve cruelty because I asked for shelter." "No," Damien said slowly. "Nor does Verity deserve suspicion because she asked for counsel." Octavia turned back to him, alarm passing through her softness like a shadow behind lace. "If she proceeds, she will expose your household. She will expose me. Contest it. Make her explain herself publicly. She won't dare. Women like Verity need society to believe them noble." Damien heard the phrase, "women like Verity." He remembered Lady Pevensy's insult at the opera, practical Duchess, linen and menus. He remembered Octavia in the dining room, asking Verity to manage the table. He remembered his own silence. His anger at Verity did not disappear. It changed direction and became harder to hold. "Leave me," he said. Octavia stared. "Damien, please." The courtesy was colder than a command. She hesitated, then gathered herself. At the door, she turned back with her hand at her throat, where the ribbon lay hidden beneath black lace. "Don't let her make you ashamed of kindness." After she left, Damien unlocked the drawer where he had placed the letter taken from Verity in the gallery. The folded pages lay there, accusing in their stillness. He had kept them unread because unread truth could be called privacy. His hand hovered above them. Then, from the corridor beyond the study, he heard the faint metallic sound of a key against another key. Octavia's footsteps moved toward the west wing. Damien stood very still. At Lady Salcomb's house, Verity sealed her authorization to Mr. Pember and placed the anonymous note beneath it. "Send both," she said. "Let counsel see what silence breeds." Lady Salcombe nodded to the footman. When the door closed, Verity looked down at her empty hands. They shook now, but the shaking no longer felt like weakness. It felt like a body learning it had survived obedience and might yet survive freedom. Damien followed the sound of the keys because, for the first time since Octavia had entered Norleigh House, the small music of brass against brass did not sound like memory. It sounded like warning. The corridor to the west wing lay dim beneath lowered lamps. and every step he took through it returned another image he had avoided. Ruth Bell dismissed with a bundle, Verity standing before the household while he placed the second key in Octavia's hand, Alderwick turning pages without touching what Damien had once claimed to protect, and Verity's face when she asked whether he was angry. Because she had been false, or because someone had finally listened. He had told himself his wife was jealous. It had been a convenient word, clean enough to hide behind. Jealousy made her small. Truth, if truth existed, would make him cruel. Light showed beneath the gallery door. It had been locked by his order. Now it stood half open, the key left in the lock as if haste had overcome caution. Damien pushed the door wider. Octavia stood near the hearth in black silk, one hand holding a packet of folded papers, the other extended toward the flames. Fire had already taken the edge of a letter. It curled, darkened, and fell inward before he could cross the room. She turned with a gasp too sharp to be convincing. Damien. You frightened me. He looked at the papers, then at the keys lying on the pianoforte behind her. What are you burning? Nothing of importance. Then take it out. Her mouth trembled. Please don't speak to me like that. Take it out of the fire, Octavia. For a moment the mask held, then she moved too slowly. Damien reached the hearth and used the iron tongs to draw 3 half-burned sheets from the edge of the grate. Smoke rose from them in thin grey threads. One page had lost its corner, but the hand remained clear. Her hand. He knew it before he read a word. My dearest Damien, by the time you read this, I shall already have left London. The sentence struck him with the force of a door opening in the wrong room. He read on. Sir Alistair has offered what love, however dear, cannot promise. Settlement. Security. A name that does not ask me to wait upon uncertain favour. He stopped. Octavia whispered, I was young. Damien did not look at her. If I seemed tender, it was because I was tender, when tenderness cost nothing. Useful appeared on the next surviving line, the word scorched at the edge but still legible. Useful. The same word Verity had carried in a torn scrap, while he had called her conduct unbecoming. Damien set the letter on the marble surround, with painful care, and lifted another sheet. This one bore the watermark he had seen named in Mr. Pember's letter, Harrow and Pike. The text was newer, outstanding obligations, private advances, widow's settlement insufficient. Prior correspondence to be directed through discreet domestic channel, if His Grace remains disposed to protection. He read the phrase again. Discreet domestic channel. Norleigh House. His house. His wife's house. Octavia had written before she arrived. She had not come to the door in desperation. She had chosen the hour, the rain, the morning gown, the key. She had chosen him as carefully as she had once chosen Sir Alistair. You came back because you were indebted, he said. I came back because I had nowhere else. You came back because you believed I would still be useful. Her eyes filled at once. How can you make need sound ugly? I was frightened. Sir Alistair left me with obligations I didn't understand. My father wouldn't help. Everyone had gone. You were the only person who had ever loved me enough to be kind. Damien looked around the gallery. The pianoforte, the marked music, the hidden panel, the room Verity had entered like a stranger, while Octavia moved through it as if no wife stood in her way. I called this kindness. Octavia stepped toward him. Verity has done this. She's turned you against me. She found a private letter and made it poison, because she couldn't bear that you once loved me. She asked me to read it. His voice had gone quiet. I refused, because you were protecting me. No, because protecting you allowed me not to look at what I had done to her. Octavia's tears stopped as if a curtain had dropped. She would never have had you if I had stayed. The words came naked, stripped of tremor and widowhood. Damien stared at her. There it was. Not grief, possession, not love. A claim preserved because no one had challenged the shrine. And yet, he said slowly, she was the one who kept my name honorable. Octavia's face hardened, then softened again too late. Damien, don't go to her like this. You'll humiliate yourself. He gathered the surviving papers and folded them into his coat. That may be overdue. The next afternoon, Lady Salcomb's footman announced the Duke of Norleigh, with the tone one might use for an unwelcome bill. Damien entered the Wimpole Street drawing-room and understood, before any person spoke, that this house had given Verity something his had not. The right not to brace herself at the sound of a door. Lady Salcombe sat beside the fire, upright and merciless. Lady Elspeth Marwood occupied the chair nearest the window. Leander Beaumont stood by a writing table, with a folder of charity papers in his hand, visibly placed beneath the eyes of both older ladies. Nothing in the arrangement could be called improper. That made Damien's jealousy feel shabby before it had fully risen. Verity stood near the mantel in grey silk, composed but not diminished. She did not look surprised to see him. That hurt more than alarm would have done. "Lady Salcombe," Damien said, bowing, "I request a word with my wife." "Her Grace is not misplaced property," Lady Salcombe replied. "She has not returned upon request. I came to apologize." "Then you may begin by remembering she is present." Verity looked at him then. "Why have you come?" Damien felt the burned papers inside his coat. For years, he had commanded rooms by knowing what every person in them expected from his rank. In this one, rank offered no shelter. I read the letters. Her eyes did not soften. This time, the blow was deserved. "Yes. And what did they tell you?" He drew the papers out and placed them on the table. "That you were right. Octavia left by choice for Sir Alistair's settlement. She returned under debt and had written to Harrow and Pike before she came to Norleigh House. She lied to me. She lied to you." Lady Elspeth leaned forward slightly. Lady Salcombe's expression did not change. Leander remained silent. Verity looked at the burned edges, then back at Damien. "She lied, yes. But she could only wound me because you gave her the weapon." Damien closed his eyes for one brief instant. When he opened them, she was still there, and the steadiness of her face seemed more terrible than tears. "I know. Do you? I brought her into your home. I allowed her to sit beside me and make you serve old memory as if it were charity. I let her shame you before servants. I locked the gallery after you found truth there, then gave her the key before the household. I believed her distress before I respected your dignity." His voice lowered. "I am sorry." The room did not grant him release. No one rushed to praise the confession. No one helped him carry it. Verity's hands remained still. "Those are events," she said. "Not the wound." Damien swallowed. "Then tell me the wound." "No, the refusal was quiet and complete. I carried it alone long enough. I won't teach you how to recognize it now, because you are finally uncomfortable." Leander's gaze dropped, not in triumph, but in respect. Damien saw the movement and felt jealousy flare, because another man knew when to be silent. "You have no right to stand here as though you are her guardian," Damien said. Leander looked up. "I don't claim that right. Yet here you are, with my aunt, in Lady Salcombe's drawing-room, holding charity papers in plain sight. That is the point." Lady Salcombe made a sharp sound. "If only every gentleman understood the difference between presence and possession." Damien turned back to Verity. "Come home." The words emerged before pride could dress them better. "Not to forgive everything. Not at once. But come home and I will make this right." Verity's face changed, not with hope, with grief at how little he still understood. "You cannot make a locked house into a home by admitting you hid the key. You are still my Duchess." Leander's voice cut in, low and controlled. "Then behave as though the word means something." Damien turned on him. "Stay out of my marriage." Verity stepped between their voices before either man could make her smaller by fighting over her. "Enough. I won't be made into a rope between two dukes." The room stilled. Damien looked at her, and the last of his command found no place to stand. She was not trembling. She was not pleading. She was not waiting to be chosen. "Verity," he said, and this time her name carried no order, only loss. She held his gaze. "You are not losing a wife, Your Grace. You are discovering you never kept one." The words settled over the drawing-room, with the silence of a verdict no law had yet written. Damien looked at the woman he had expected to return, because houses, titles, and habits had always returned women to men like him. Instead, he saw Verity, under a modest roof, surrounded by witnesses who gave her room to speak. And he understood that truth had arrived too late to be a rescue. It could only be a consequence. By the next morning, Damien's apology had become less important to London than the fact that Verity had not accepted it. Men forgot that women could refuse sorrow after it finally arrived dressed as regret, but society did not forget to punish them for refusing. By noon, the rumour had acquired a carriage, a time, and a motive. Alderwick's carriage had been seen near Wimpole Street. The Duchess had planned her departure before leaving Norleigh House. The charity papers had been a cover. Lord Alderwick had guided her to council. Each version arrived at Lady Salcomb's door, disguised as concern, and each one tried to make Verity's freedom look like another man's design. Lady Salcombe read the latest note, folded it with disdain, and dropped it into the fire. A lie with wheels is still a lie. Verity sat at the writing desk with Mr. Pember's latest letter open before her. Harrow and Pike had acknowledged past Fenwick obligations, though full extracts would require formal request. Ruth Bell had sent word through Mrs. Ansell that she would swear, if properly protected, to what she had seen in the West Corridor. Lady Elspeth had already put her name to the committee room exchange. Evidence was gathering, but so was the crowd eager to turn evidence into impropriety. They will say I left because of Lord Alderwick, Verity said. They already do, Lady Salcombe replied. The question is whether you intend to live by what they say. Before Verity could answer, the footman announced Lady Elspeth Marwood and the Duke of Alderwick. They arrived in a plain carriage without crest, and Leander entered with his aunt at his side, and a leather folder of charity accounts in his hand. The arrangement was so carefully proper that it might have been drawn by a solicitor. Lady Salcombe approved it with one glance. "We shall receive you in the front room," she said. "The curtains are open. Let any spy across the street die of boredom." Lady Elspeth removed her gloves. "Excellent. I have always maintained that propriety should be visible enough to irritate malicious people." Leander bowed to Verity. He did not ask whether she had recovered from Damien's visit. He did not look at her with pity. That was another form of mercy. "Your Grace." Lord Alderwick. Lady Salcombe and Lady Elspeth settled near the hearth with the charity papers between them, deliberately audible and deliberately dull. Leander remained standing until Lady Salcombe gave him permission to sit near the writing table several feet from Verity. The distance was correct. It hurt anyway. He seemed to know it. "I must ask you something plainly," he said. Verity closed Mr. Pember's letter. "Then please do. Does my presence make your position more difficult?" She had expected some version of the question. She had not expected the care beneath it to feel so dangerous. "London has decided your presence explains my courage. London is often lazy." Yes. His hands rested on the folder, still and gloved. "If my remaining in town injures your petition or your name, I will leave for Eversholt Hall tomorrow morning." The room did not change, but Verity felt something inside her draw back, as if from cold. "You would go?" "Yes. Because you believe the rumour?" "No. Because rumours need not be true to damage a woman. And your own wishes? They are not the measure of your safety." Lady Elspeth looked down at her papers, though Verity suspected she had stopped reading. Verity forced herself to meet his eyes. "You have been very careful." "Not from perfection." A faint shadow crossed his face. "My mother's cousin was once ruined by a gentleman who believed public devotion would protect her. He called attention love. He called interference rescue. By the end, the world had forgiven him for being ardent and condemned her for being visible." Verity had never heard his voice carry such quiet bitterness. "Is that why you step back?" "It is why I learned that protection without restraint can become another form of harm." The sentence settled between them with more intimacy than any touch could have held. He was not an untroubled hero standing above her pain. He was a man who had studied consequence and chosen discipline because tenderness alone was not enough. Verity looked toward the window. Across the street, a woman paused too long near a waiting carriage, then moved on. "If you leave," Verity said, They will still say you left because there was something to hide. Yes, if you stay, they will say you stayed because there is something to prove. Yes, then I cannot use exile as proof of innocence. I have already spent too much life becoming smaller for other people's comfort. Leander's expression changed by almost nothing, yet the room seemed to warm. That sounds like courage. It feels like fatigue. I have often found the two related. A small laugh escaped her before she could stop it. The sound surprised both of them. Lady Salcombe gave a sharp look toward Lady Elspeth, as if warning sentiment not to overstep. Leander lowered his gaze to the folder. There is one more truth I owe you, and then I will not trouble you with it again, unless you invite me to. Verity's breath slowed. Say it. I care for you. He spoke the words without ornament, without pressure, and because he did not lean toward her, they reached her with more force. I care for your dignity first. Your freedom before that. If affection from me makes either harder, I will remove myself from the room, the street, or London. I will not make your liberty appear purchased by my attention. Verity's eyes stung, but she did not let tears do the speaking. She had been misread too often. I don't know what I feel, she said, because truth deserved human language. I only know I breathe more easily when you're in the room. His eyes closed for one brief second. When he opened them, restraint remained, but it had become tender. Then I will be careful with the room. Lady Salcombe cleared her throat. That is enough sincerity. Any more, and Lady Elspeth will accuse me of hosting romance before luncheon. I would never, Lady Elspeth said. I would merely supervise it with legal witnesses. The tension eased, but did not vanish. It became something steadier, a thread pulled taut, but not broken. The next card arrived an hour later, sealed in amber wax, and scented faintly enough to suggest expense rather than taste. Lady Salcombe broke the seal, read, and her mouth thinned. Lady Marcham. Verity took the card. The handwriting flowed elegantly, every curve arranged to make malice look like hospitality. A small drawing-room assembly was planned for Thursday evening. Certain painful impressions, Lady Marcham wrote, had injured too many honourable names. If Her Grace wished to settle confusion before society hardened into judgment, she would be received. Lady Octavia Fenwick would attend. The Duke of Norleigh had been invited. So had the Duke of Alderwick. A final line had been added in smaller script. Lady Octavia has expressed willingness to answer what others have only whispered. Verity read it once, then again. There was the trap. Not rumour in corridors. A room, witnesses. Octavia's grief arranged opposite Verity's dignity. Lady Pevensy's poison-given chairs and tea. You need not go, Leander said quietly. If you go, they will try to make you defend me before you defend yourself. If I do not go, they will say absence confessed, what lies invented. Lady Elspeth rose and crossed to the table. Then we prepare the truth well enough that lies feel underdressed. By late afternoon, the first pieces arrived, Mr. Pember sent notice that Harrow and Pike had confirmed records of Fenwick obligations and prior correspondence connected to Lady Octavia before her arrival at Norleigh House. Full copies would come under seal. Lady Elspeth had written her statement about the watermark and committee room. Ruth Bell's signed account was being taken through Mrs. Vale's sister, witnessed by a respectable lodging-house keeper. Leander's note, delivered unsealed through Lady Elspeth to Lady Salcombe, contained only facts. Lady Elspeth and I will attend if you wish for witnesses. I will not speak unless asked to facts. Your voice must remain your own. Verity held that sentence longer than the rest. Your voice must remain your own. Damien had asked her to come home once he had understood. Octavia had asked society to pity her before it questioned her. Leander asked only to stand where truth required him and step back where it did not. What answer shall I send? Lady Salcombe asked. Verity sat at the writing desk. Her hand was steadier than her heart, which perhaps was how bravery often began. To Lady Marcham she wrote a formal acceptance. To Mr. Pember, she requested sealed extracts and copies prepared for Thursday evening. To Ruth Bell, she sent assurance that no servant's honesty would be abandoned because it inconvenienced a lady. Then she took a smaller sheet and wrote to Leander, under Lady Salcomb's approving eye. "Please attend, and please trust me to stand." She sealed it before she could soften the words. Across London that evening, in the West Music Gallery at Norleigh House, Octavia read Lady Marcham's confirmation and closed her fingers over the 2 brass keys lying on the pianoforte. For the first time since her return, her smile did not fully obey her. The Duchess had accepted. The silent wife was coming to speak. Lady Marcham's drawing-room had been arranged for tea, but every chair in it faced judgment. Lamps glowed beneath rose shades. The fire burned low and flattering, and silver trays stood ready with cups no one truly wanted. The room was full before Verity entered, crowded with patronesses, cautious wives, curious widows, and gentlemen who had come because scandal sounded more respectable when hosted by Lady Marcham. She received Verity with a smile that admired courage and fed upon it at the same time. "Duchess, how gracious of you to come." Verity stood with Lady Salcombe at her side, and the sealed portfolio from Mr. Pember beneath her hand. "How thoughtful of you to provide witnesses." A murmur shifted across the silk and feathers. Lady Marcham's eyes brightened. She liked spectacle, but she liked even more the power of deciding when spectacle became verdict. Near the mantel stood Lady Elspeth Marwood, silver-haired and stern. Leander Beaumont stood beside her, not near Verity, not claiming any place that could be twisted into intimacy. Damien waited by the window, pale and rigid, as if rank alone could keep him upright. Octavia sat near Lady Pevensey in mourning black, a fragile portrait of injured womanhood. One brass key lay at her throat. Verity knew the other was hidden in her glove. Lady Marcham closed her fan. "We are all friends here." Lady Salcombe made a sound. "That has never comforted me." Octavia lifted her eyes. "I never wanted this. Truly, I didn't." But when whispers wound honorable names, silence becomes cruelty. "Then let us not be cruel," Verity said. "State the accusation plainly." Lady Pevensey leaned forward, eager beneath her polish. "No one wishes to accuse, Your Grace. But Lord Alderwick's carriage has been observed near Wimpole Street. He was seen with your papers at the Charity Committee. He turned pages for you at the music hall, with an attentiveness that society naturally noticed. A wife who leaves her husband's house after receiving such notice must understand the difficulty." Octavia placed one hand to her breast. A widow asking for shelter is easily misunderstood. But a wife who seeks public pity can be more dangerous than anyone dares say. Verity looked at her. "Dangerous to whom?" Octavia's mouth trembled. "To a husband's name. To an old friend's reputation. To every woman who has only grief left." Verity opened the portfolio. The soft sound of paper quieted the room more quickly than outrage would have done. "Then we shall begin with dates, not grief." Lady Octavia came to Norleigh House wearing a brass key to the West Music Gallery, a room I, as Duchess, had never been allowed to enter. His Grace wore its match. At Lady Octavia's request, the gallery was opened. There, I found a letter hidden behind the pianoforte. Octavia went still. A private letter, hidden in my husband's house and used to preserve a false history. Verity placed a certified copy on the table. This letter states that Lady Octavia left Damien because Sir Alistair Fenwick offered settlement, security, and a name, not because she was forced into tragic sacrifice. Lady Pevensey gave a brittle laugh. "Old letters can be cruelly interpreted." Lady Elspeth stepped forward. "Watermarks are less sentimental." I saw the torn scrap in a public committee room. It bore the mark of Harrow and Pike, solicitors connected with Fenwick obligations. Verity placed the second paper beside the first. Mr. Pember's sealed extracts confirm that Harrow and Pike handled private obligations tied to the Fenwick estate and correspondence before Lady Octavia came to Norleigh House. Lady Marcham's expression sharpened. Before, Verity said. Lady Octavia did not stumble into shelter by accident. She had already sought a discreet domestic channel. Octavia rose, shaking now with something stronger than sorrow. "This is monstrous." She found a private wound and dressed it as evidence, because she's jealous. Jealousy did not dismiss Ruth Bell, Verity said. Lady Octavia did, Another paper came out, smaller and plainer. Ruth Bell, formerly a housemaid at Norleigh House, gives statement that she saw Lady Octavia leave the West Gallery before His Grace was summoned on the night I found the letter. She was dismissed the next day over a ribbon. Lady Pevensey snapped. A servant's word hardly outweighs a lady's. Lady Elspeth's voice cut cleanly. A servant's eyes may see what a lady's pride cannot bear to admit. The room changed, not loudly, not mercifully. It tilted. Octavia looked to Damien. Say something? Damien moved from the window. His face had the color of a man walking toward his own ruin because he had finally recognized it as deserved. The Duchess speaks truth. Octavia whispered. Damien, don't. He did not look at her. I brought Lady Octavia into my home. I allowed her private access and confidence no married man had the right to give another woman. I placed old attachment above marital duty. I permitted my wife to be diminished at my table, in my hall, and before my servants. When she found evidence, I called her conduct unbecoming. I gave Lady Octavia the second key to the gallery in front of the household. The silence became complete. Verity had imagined satisfaction. Instead, she felt only the heavy justice of a truth arriving too late to repair what it proved. Damien continued, voice lower but clear. I will provide, Mr. Pember, any sworn statement his counsel requires. I will not contest Her Grace's deed of separation, nor any petition her counsel places before the court. I will make honourable provision. Society will not place my fault upon my wife. Lady Marcham slowly lowered herself into a chair. For once, she seemed less amused than attentive. A hostess might enjoy scandal, but no woman of rank enjoyed being used as furniture for another woman's lie. Octavia looked around the room and found faces withdrawing from her, one by one. Lady Pevensey's fan had stopped. No one reached for Octavia's hand. So that is it, Octavia said. The softness was gone now. You all choose her because she played a pretty piece and looked tragic doing it. Verity closed the portfolio. No, they are hearing what you tried to burn. Octavia's eyes flashed. She was nothing to him until you all began praising her. The room inhaled. There was the truth, naked at last. No veil, no mourning, no tremor. Damien flinched as if the words had exposed him more than her. Verity looked at Octavia with a sadness clean enough to contain no fear. I was nothing to him because he chose not to see me. That was his failure. You made it your opportunity. Octavia stepped back. I loved him. You used him, Verity said. And when usefulness required it, you used me as the wall you could lean your grief against. Lady Salcombe spoke from beside her. Suffering is not a license to devour another woman's life. Verity reached into her reticule and withdrew the old brass key Damien had once worn, returned to her by Mr. Pember with the evidence taken from the gallery. The metal looked small in her palm, smaller than the pane it had opened. She crossed the carpet, every eye following her, and placed it on the table before Damien. The sound was slight. It silenced more than a cry. This was never mine, she said. She looked at him then, not as a wife begging to be seen, and not as a woman asking him to suffer. Nor, in truth, were you. Damien's face changed fully at last. Pride fell away, and behind it stood grief without entitlement. Verity did not go to him. That was not cruelty, it was freedom. Leander raised his eyes across the room. He did not smile. He did not move toward her. He simply stood where he had promised to stand, a witness to her voice, not its owner. Lady Marcham closed her fan with a decisive snap. I believe, she said, her tone altered by the rare humility of having misjudged the center of her own room. The painful impressions have been settled. Yes, Verity said. They have. She turned to leave. Lady Salcombe walked beside her. Lady Elspeth followed, and the path opened without anyone being asked to make one. Behind Verity, whispers began again, but they had changed direction. They no longer hunted her as guilt. They followed her as proof. At the threshold, she passed Leander. His hand remained at his side. His voice, barely above breath, reached only her. Your voice remained your own. Verity did not answer aloud. She did not need to. Outside, the London evening was cold enough to clear the scent of tea, perfume, and accusation from her lungs. She stepped into it without the key, without the house, without the old silence. And, for the first time since she had become Duchess of Norleigh, no locked room waited inside her name. Nearly a year after Lady Marcham's drawing-room fell silent around the sound of an old brass key on a polished table, Verity stood before another door and discovered that freedom could frighten a woman even when it came dressed as kindness. Eversholt Hall lay quiet beneath the pale spring sky, its long lawns washed clean by morning rain, its windows open to the scent of grass, damp stone, and the first white blossoms in the orchard beyond the south garden. It was not Norleigh House. No corridor seemed to wait with a secret. No servant lowered her eyes, as though compassion had to be hidden beneath discipline. Yet when Leander Beaumont placed a new brass key in Verity's gloved hand, her fingers went cold. The metal was warmer than the old key had ever looked, newly cut, tied with a narrow blue ribbon, rather than mourning black. It should have felt innocent. Instead, for one sharp breath, she saw Octavia at the entrance hall with the old key against her throat. She saw Damien placing its match in another woman's hand before the servants. She saw the West Music Gallery opening like a wound in the house she had managed but never belonged to. Leander saw the change in her face and did not pretend not to. He stepped back from the door. "You don't have to open it." Lady Salcombe stood several feet behind them, with Lady Elspeth Marwood, both women making an obvious performance of examining the corridor's portraits. Verity looked down at the key. "You restored the room. I had it made ready," Leander said. "That isn't the same thing." No. A room only becomes itself if someone chooses to enter." The words were offered simply, without pressure. That had been the shape of his love from the beginning. He had never treated her fear as a locked gate he was entitled to force. He had waited outside it with a lamp, and when she did not come, he kept the light burning anyway. The months between Lady Marcham's assembly and this morning had been neither easy nor dramatic enough to satisfy gossip. Mr. Pember had proceeded with care. Damien had provided sworn statements as promised, admitted the facts required by counsel, signed the deed of separation without contest, and refused every attempt by his own relatives to cast himself as the injured husband. The petition, once placed before the proper hands, moved slowly through statements, consultations, and formal silence. When the decree finally came, it arrived on a grey morning in Lady Salcombe's breakfast room, folded into ordinary paper. Verity had read it twice, not because she doubted it, but because part of her body still expected permission to be withdrawn. Lady Salcombe had poured tea and said, "There. The law has at last arrived late to a truth every decent woman in London already knew." Damien withdrew to Caldon Park and remained there. His last letter came through Mr. Pember. It contained provision, apology, and no plea. That restraint, arriving after years of entitlement, was perhaps the first fully honourable thing he had given her. Octavia's fate had been quieter than scandal desired, and harsher for being quiet. Once Harrow and Pike's rods confirmed the Fenwick obligations, and the trustee took control, London doors closed with efficient coldness. Lady Pevensey discovered urgent health reasons for leaving town. Lady Marcham ceased inviting fragile widows whose grief required keys. Octavia was sent to a dependent household on the continent, where mourning silk could not purchase influence, and old tenderness had no duke left to shelter it. Verity did not rejoice. She had learned that freedom did not need the ruin of another woman for music, it needed air. "What is behind this door?" she asked, though she knew. Leander's gaze remained on her hand, not her face, as if even looking too eagerly might feel like demand. "My mother's music room. It has been neglected for many years." Lady Elspeth declared the curtains criminal, the chairs punitive, and the pianoforte insulted by dust. "All true," Lady Elspeth said. "I saved the room from moral collapse." Lady Salcombe gave a snip, "and made my niece walk half the length of Kent to admire upholstery." Verity smiled, but her hand still trembled around the key. Leander saw that too. "Verity," he said softly, using her name only after months of earning the right to make it gentle, "if the key wounds you, give it back. The room can remain open without it." or closed, or changed into a library, or left to Lady Elspeth's campaign against chairs. I don't offer it as a claim. Then what is it? A choice. The word moved through her more deeply than any declaration could have done. A choice, not a test of gratitude. Not proof that she had healed quickly enough to deserve happiness. Not another beautiful room with another woman's memory waiting inside. Verity placed the key into the lock. It turned smoothly. The door opened. Light entered first. The room beyond was high-ceilinged and gentle, with tall windows facing the garden and a pianoforte near the open casement. Shelves held bound music, blank paper, and a small vase of white flowers. There were no hidden initials on the music stand, no old letter behind the panel, no portrait watching from shadow. On the pianoforte lay 2 pages. One was the copied piece from Norleigh's West Gallery, the other was blank. Verity stepped across the threshold alone. No one followed until she looked back. Leander remained in the corridor. "It's yours if you want it," he said. "And if I do not, then it's still open." Something inside her loosened, not healed all at once. Healing had never been as tidy as people wished, but loosened. 3 weeks later, in the small chapel at Eversholt, Verity took Leander's hand before witnesses who had earned the right to see her happiness. Lady Salcombe stood in grey silk, with suspicious brightness in her eyes. Lady Elspeth dabbed at nothing with a handkerchief and denied it fiercely. Mr. Pember attended with grave satisfaction. Ruth Bell stood near the back, respectably dressed and newly placed in a household where her honesty had become an asset rather than a danger. Beside her stood Mrs. Ansell, who had travelled from London on her own leave and wept without apology when Verity entered. The ceremony was not a spectacle. No ballroom applause greeted her. No one required her to prove joy through display. The chapel smelled of beeswax, old stone, and spring flowers. When Leander placed the ring upon her finger, his hand was steady, but his voice was not. "I don't ask you to forget what hurt you," he said afterward, when they stood briefly near the chapel door while the guests moved toward the wedding breakfast. "I only ask to be part of what doesn't." Verity looked up at him. She had feared once that love might always arrive, carrying terms written by someone else. His had arrived with patience, witnesses, and unlocked doors. "You are," she said. His breath left him slowly, as if the answer had been held in his chest for months. "Then I'm the most fortunate man in England." "That sounds excessive, Your Grace." "I've been restrained for nearly a year." "Allow me one excessive sentence." She laughed, and the sound startled a skylark from the chapel roof. Later, when the house had filled with voices, breakfast, flowers, and the soft disorder of welcome, Verity returned to the music room alone. She did not do so from sadness. She did it because solitude no longer meant abandonment. The windows stood open. Garden air moved through the room, lifting the corner of the blank page on the pianoforte. She placed the copied piece from Norleigh to one side. It had taught her something once, but it did not own the day. Then she sat and rested her fingers on the keys. Before she played, a quiet knock sounded at the open door. Leander stood on the threshold. Not over it, not inside without invitation. "May I listen?" he asked. Verity looked at the man who had defended her without claiming her, loved her without hurrying her, and waited until freedom had become hers before asking to share it. "Yes," she said. "You may." He entered and took a chair near the window, close enough to hear the faintest note, far enough to leave the room around her. Verity began to play, not Octavia's memory, not Damien's regret, not the old West Gallery piece that had once proved she could be heard. This music began uncertainly, then found its strength, opening into a melody with pauses where pain had lived, and brightness where choice had entered. The notes moved through the open windows, across the lawn, past the chapel, and into the spring air. When the final chord faded, Leander waited until silence had room to settle. Then he said, "You were never hard to love. You were only surrounded by people determined not to learn how." Verity touched the new brass key lying beside the music. Once, a key had shown her where she was not wanted. This one had opened because she had chosen it. She looked at the blank page. then at the open door and placed her hands back on the keys. This time, no room in her heart remained locked.